Hi, I'm Tamsin. They tied me to a post, yes, literally, at my own family reunion. Called me trash in front of everyone. And the worst part? I paid for the event. Every plate, every flower, every light on that lawn. They never saw me, until the man they didn't know was my husband showed up. You ever wonder what it feels like to be erased by the people who raised you? Stick around, because this story doesn't end in silence. I wasn't expecting anything when I checked the mailbox. Just the usual flyers, maybe another insurance ad stuffed in glossy paper. But there it was, an envelope, thick and elegant, with the Ashcroft family crest embossed in gold on the flap. My pulse skipped, then steadied. I hadn't seen that symbol in nearly a decade, and even now, it didn't bring warmth, just memory. The front didn't say my name, not Tamsin Hale, not even the name I was born with. It read, "To the one who once carried the Ashcroft name." I turned it over in my hand slowly, letting the weight of that phrase settle. No note, no signature, just instructions for a family legacy gathering in Charleston. Dress code, formal Southern elegance. RSVP requested, but clearly not expected. They knew I wouldn't say no, not because I cared, but because they were daring me to show up. I scrolled through the family WhatsApp group later that evening, a thread that hadn't seen my number in years. They didn't bother to remove me, but no one ever spoke to me directly. Aunts confirming potluck dishes, cousins bragging about careers, Odessa listing the seating chart, every name carefully tagged. Mine absent, as if I were watching a show I'd once been cast in, but had since been written out of. They don't know who I've become, I murmured to myself. Or worse, they do, and they've decided I'm not worth naming. I booked my ticket to Charleston anyway. It had been 8 years since I last set foot on the family estate. The driveway still curled like a question mark, lined with perfectly trimmed boxwoods. The house stood just as grand, white columns and wraparound porches. The kind of Southern charm people imagined was built on grace, not guilt. A valet took my suitcase without looking at me. The staff wore crisp uniforms, just like always. Familiar faces who'd learned long ago not to greet me unless prompted. I walked slowly, like someone crossing a stage they hadn't rehearsed for. Odessa appeared at the top of the steps. Her dress was ivory with lace sleeves, the kind that said Southern Belle, with a smirk. She smiled when she saw me, not kindly, just politely enough. "Oh, you came," she said, voice light. "Brave?" Before I could respond, she gestured toward the side patio. "You can take that seat. It's out of the way, but it's still technically part of the event." I followed her gaze and saw it. One lone folding chair next to the portable restroom, half in the shade, half forgotten. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why. I just sat down. That had always been my role in this family. To be there, but not be seen. The reunion prep was already in full swing. I watched Odessa micromanage flower arrangements and direct staff like a pageant queen. A small stage had been set up near the fountain, lights positioned just so. Everyone buzzed around her. No one glanced at me. Every Ashcroft child had their own engraved name card at the dinner table, except me. Mine was a handwritten slip of printer paper that said, "TH, guest." Not even the decency of a full name. I approached Odessa near the catering tent, held the card lightly between two fingers. "Is there a change to the seating?" I asked. She looked at it, then at me. "Honestly, we weren't sure you'd show. Didn't want to waste a place setting." She said it so easily, like she was discussing napkin colors, then turned to answer a florist's question before I could say anything else. I walked back to the folding chair, sat down again, let the paper card sit in my lap like a joke I wasn't meant to understand. The last time I was at this table, 8 years ago, I brought my own bottle of wine. I thought it would be a nice gesture. They laughed, said it didn't fit the tone, and poured it out. I told myself I left on my own terms back then, that I had nothing to prove, that I didn't need their validation. But as I sat there now, nameless and positioned like overflow staff, I realized something I hadn't let myself admit. A part of me had always hoped they'd one day be proud to see me return. Not because I'd earned their respect, I had that on my own, but because I wanted to believe that family meant something more than optics, that maybe, just maybe, there'd be a space for me again, one that wasn't conditional, but maybe I was never meant to belong here. And this time, I'm not pretending I do. As the breeze carried the scent of honeysuckle through the open corridor, I stepped into the upstairs hallway of the estate. The light filtering through the curtains was warm, forgiving even, but nothing about the air in that house felt forgiving. Verlene was already waiting near the guest room. She didn't knock, just opened the door and laid something on the bed. I stayed quiet. She turned toward me, smoothing out a beige linen dress. "All the women are wearing neutrals," she said. "This will help you match. We don't want anyone standing out for the wrong reasons." Her voice never changed pitch, never hesitated. She wasn't offering, she was issuing a polite instruction. I picked up the dress. The tags had been removed. The size was exactly right, like she'd checked without asking. I pressed my fingers into the fabric. Expensive, soft, carefully chosen. Not for beauty, for blending. I folded it back into thirds and returned it to the drawer. She didn't ask why. I didn't explain. When she left, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the door for a while, just listening. The hallway murmurs, the occasional laugh, a clink of glass. All familiar. All staged. Downstairs, the reunion reception had begun. I made my way toward the side lawn where the event team was prepping. Just outside the catering tent, I paused to watch a young man adjust a table setting. He glanced up, gave me a short nod, then, thinking I was part of the service staff, handed me a silver tray of champagne flutes. "Be careful," he said casually. "They like the stems facing right." Before I could speak, someone behind me chuckled. I turned slightly and met the gaze of one of my father's cousins. Philip, maybe? He looked like money-made flesh, hair still thick at 60, teeth bright as a realtor's billboard. "I didn't know they let the help mingle this year," he said, swirling his drink with a smirk. "Guess it's part of the charm." I didn't respond. I placed the tray back on the table and kept walking. There was nothing new about being mistaken for someone paid to serve. What stuck wasn't the words. It was the comfort with which he said them. Like I had no right to correct him. Back inside, I drifted toward the back kitchen, where it was quieter. I needed to think, to breathe. The kitchen smelled like citrus and wood polish. A tray of deviled eggs sat untouched on the counter. I stood there, hands in my pockets, when Odessa walked in. She took one look at me, still in my travel clothes, not in the beige dress, and let out a sharp sigh. "You always make everything harder than it needs to be," she said, stepping over to the fridge for a bottle of sparkling water. "You say you want to be accepted, but you don't even try to meet us halfway." I didn't bother turning to face her. "Meeting you halfway only works if the road runs both directions." She gave a soft laugh, the kind that hides irritation. "It's a family gathering, Tamsin, not a protest." I didn't argue. I'd learned that silence unsettles people more than shouting ever could. She left with her drink, heels tapping out judgment as she went. Later, I found a quiet spot near the staircase and leaned against the railing, staring down at the main room filling up with laughter and wine. I watched people I'd known since childhood hug like strangers playing happy. Everyone polished, groomed, curated, everyone playing their part in the production. A flash of memory surfaced, uninvited. I was 19 at the last summer reunion I'd attended. It was peak heat, and I'd volunteered to help carry chairs to the far side of the lawn. No one asked, I just did it. I poured drinks, set up place cards. I remember asking Verlene if I could be included in the event program, just a small note under contributing family. She had smiled and said, "We don't list everyone. Otherwise, it becomes a participation trophy." Back then, I'd accepted it as logistics. But now, I knew better. It wasn't logistics. It was a lesson. A lesson in how to be useful, but not visible. How to contribute, but never be credited. How to show up, but not take up space. By the time the lights dimmed and the final seating arrangements were being finalized, I was still the one without a real chair. Some things don't change, and some things change you. As I stood before the mirror in my room, I looked at the dress one more time, still folded neatly where I'd left it. My reflection stared back, same face, different eyes. If blending in is the price to belong, I whispered, maybe I was never meant to. I stepped back from the mirror and drew the curtains, leaving the room dim. A quiet settled over me. Not peace, just the kind of stillness you get when your voice has nowhere to go. I didn't bother putting on the dress. I just changed into something clean and walked down the hallway, heels muffled by the carpet, heart beating steady. Not fast, just deliberate. The dinner was set in the long banquet hall, candlelit tables stretching farther than necessary. People were already seated, laughter rolling low like background music, the type reserved for people used to wearing masks. I found a chair that wasn't mine, but also wasn't marked as anyone else's, and I sat down without asking permission. A string quartet played something soft and non-committal. Then the lights dimmed further, and Odessa took the microphone. "Tonight," she began, "we look back on 6 decades of legacy, of family, of love that lasts through time and trial." The projector screen came to life behind her. I stiffened. Photo after photo flickered across the room. Slides of my siblings as toddlers, family vacations in Hilton Head, holiday dinners with people smiling for cameras. Every face I recognized, every year accounted for. Except mine. One shot stopped me cold. The 2009 Lake House reunion. There we were. Well, they were. Standing in a row, arms looped around each other. I remembered standing there that day. I remembered where I stood, who I stood next to. And in that picture, there was a space between my brother and cousin. A space wide enough for one more person, yet empty. It wasn't an accident. Odessa leaned over from her place at the front table, whispered across a wine glass like a joke. "Maybe you blinked. Or maybe I was never in it to begin with." I didn't blink. I didn't move. I let the slideshow finish. Another wedding, another scholarship award, another curated life I was supposed to admire. Applause followed. I didn't join in. As the lights brightened and people began standing to refill drinks, a cousin I vaguely remembered approached me. Not the cruel kind, just clueless. "You didn't go to law school, right?" she asked, tilting her head. "That's probably why they didn't list your stuff. They tried to keep it career-aligned." She smiled like she just explained something helpful. I smiled back with every muscle in my face and said nothing. They hadn't forgotten. They'd edited. Later, I slipped outside into the garden. The night air was thick with humidity and magnolia. Small clusters of guests posed for photos under the Ashcroft family crest, hanging from a trellis. I stood far enough back that I wouldn't accidentally be captured. The grass was cool under my heels. I curled my toes inside my shoes and focused on the sky. My hands still trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from holding in too much for too long. I didn't feel sadness, just clarity. They'd erased me not because I failed. They erased me because I didn't fit the version of success they'd agreed upon behind closed doors. I didn't go to the right schools. I didn't marry the right last name. I didn't wear the dress. But I remembered every rent check I paid on my own. Every shift I worked double so I could cover tuition. I remembered sitting in a laundromat in Savannah at 20, folding my work shirt while waiting for a callback from the bursar's office. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, we can't extend it any further. If the balance isn't cleared by Friday, you'll be withdrawn." I hung up, stared at the cracked tile on the floor, and pulled out the last $200 in my account. I didn't cry. I found a way. That was my education, not theory, but survival. Independence is always romantic in books. In real life, it's just expensive, and quiet, and unforgiving. Back in the garden, I leaned against a low brick wall while a small group giggled over a toast. Odessa posed with her husband under fairy lights. My father clapped someone on the back and handed over a scotch. My mother gestured toward the caterer, as if the timing of the crab cakes personally offended her. They were all exactly who I remembered. And somehow, worse. They edited me out of their story. But I wrote one they'll never be part of. As Odessa lifted her glass for the official toast, her voice rising over the crowd, I turned away. Not to cry, but to breathe. I took a few slow steps away from the garden wall, the grass whispering beneath my heels, and circled toward the front lawn. The laughter had started to fade, replaced by the sound of microphones being tested and camera shutters clicking in the distance. I didn't need a program to know what came next. They were shifting gears, from nostalgia to performance. A white tent had been set up across the main lawn, flanked by glowing lanterns, and a rented backdrop with the Ashcroft crest in gold foil. It was designed to look like legacy, like honor stitched together through decades of tradition. What it really was? A carefully choreographed play. And this time, I wasn't just in the audience, I was part of the show. Odessa's voice rang out from under the spotlight. This next portion of the evening is something deeply personal, a symbol of how we endure, how we grow stronger through struggle. Several people turned their chairs to face the small wooden platform in the center. A podium stood in the middle, draped in ivory cloth, the family crest embroidered like a seal of approval. "We've chosen someone special tonight," Odessa continued, her tone sweetened like southern tea. "Someone who represents what it means to weather storms and emerge with grace." They didn't say my name. They didn't have to. I felt the crowd glance toward me, curious smiles and tilted heads. Someone from the staff gently guided me forward. I didn't resist. I wanted to see how far they were willing to take this. When I stepped up, Odessa met me with a ribbon. Deep burgundy, velvet, heavier than it looked. She wrapped it around my wrists, softly, deliberately. Not tight, but enough. Enough to say, "This is the role we've written for you." She smiled. "The one who endured and kept silent." There was no warmth in it. Verlene gave a small nod from the front row. Flashbulbs went off. The audience clapped, lightly, awkwardly. A few guests leaned to whisper, maybe trying to decide if this was genuine or some avant-garde ritual. I stood there, hands loosely bound, heart steady but heavy. This wasn't a tribute, it was a reenactment. A reenactment of what they thought I owed them. They didn't want an apology. They wanted a performance. A story that painted them as graceful, generous. A redemption arc written in reverse. They wanted to use my presence as proof they were good people. And me? I was supposed to stand there and nod. After they unwrapped the ribbon, Odessa patted my arm and whispered, "You were always stronger than you gave yourself credit for." I didn't say a word, just walked off the platform. A few feet away, I spotted the dessert station. The place card marked with my name was there, except it wasn't. It said, Tammy H., in bold letters. A misspelling I hadn't gone by since middle school. Not even an attempt to get it right. I picked it up. Odessa was nearby, sipping from a glass of rosé. She shrugged. "You've changed your name so many times." "We guessed." She said it with a chuckle, like she was talking about someone trying on hats. Like my identity was just a rotating label. I didn't bother correcting her. I folded the card once, clean and slow, and slid it into my clutch. Instead of returning to the crowd, I slipped away toward the side hallway that led to the children's lounge, a quiet place that rarely saw adult footsteps during events like this. Inside, Elodie was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, coloring a family tree diagram. The paper had Ashcroft branches drawn in pencil, names lightly inked in. Hers was there. So was Odessa's. My name was missing. When she saw me, she smiled wide. "Hi, Aunt Tamsin." I sat beside her. She leaned closer. "Is it true you left because you didn't like the rules?" I hesitated. "Who told you that?" "Mom. She said you got in trouble a lot, but she forgave you." The words stung more than I expected. Not because of what they were, but because of what they erased. I picked up a colored pencil and began adding a name onto the tree. Mine. Sometimes, I said gently, people tell stories because it's easier than admitting they didn't listen. She blinked at me, curious. Not angry, just learning. She nodded and went back to coloring. I sat there a while longer. The air smelled like crayons and juice boxes. Innocence always does. When I stood up, I took the folded name card from my clutch and placed it on the shelf near the door. I didn't want it anymore, but I wanted it to be seen. Back in the hallway, I passed by the guest coat area. The beige dress from earlier was still hanging on its hook, untouched. I reached out and ran my finger across the sleeve once, then let it go. I pulled out my phone and texted Corwin. It's happening. They turned it into a pageant. I'm staying, but not to clap. The applause started inside. I stood outside the door and listened, not as a daughter, but as a witness. The applause inside grew louder, measured, polite, the kind that's practiced. I turned away from the door and took the long way around the house, past the columns wrapped in twinkle lights, past the caterers clearing plates with the same mechanical grace I used to carry myself in this family. I followed the back path that curved toward the ballroom entrance. Once inside, the shift in temperature hit me immediately. Cooler air, brighter chandeliers, and the weight of people watching each other more than listening. The dining hall had been rearranged with precision. Every napkin folded identically, every centerpiece a curated echo of tradition. I found the stage manager near the back wall, flipping through a clipboard. "Hi," I said evenly. "I just wanted to check. My speaking slot should be right before the Ashcroft Foundation toast. I submitted it 3 weeks ago through the family liaison." She smiled politely, scanning the list. I'm not seeing your name here." I was about to clarify when Odessa appeared behind her, stepping in like she'd been waiting for her cue. "Oh, we revised the program," she said, her tone sugary. "For flow. You're not on anymore. We decided it was better for consistency." She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. That's how people behave when they expect you to understand your place without a scene. "It's not personal," she added, before turning on her heel and disappearing behind the velvet curtain. Of course it was personal. That line is always the opener to a slap without fingerprints. I turned and walked toward the exit, hands relaxed at my sides. Not clenched, just empty. Outside, the night had settled thick. I moved past a cluster of guests near the buffet tent. 2 distant cousins, Marcus and Reed, if I remembered right, were hovering near the drink station, talking low, but not low enough. "That new tech company, Rice Atlas," one of them said. "The founder's name came up on Bloomberg. Can't remember it. Something Eastern sounding. Brilliant, though." "Not from Charleston, I'll tell you that," the other added with a laugh. "Definitely not Ashcroft material." I didn't stop walking. I didn't interrupt. I just kept moving and smiled to myself, because Rice Atlas was mine. They'd already shaken my hand at registration, already eaten hors d'oeuvres paid for by a company they couldn't even pronounce, because I hadn't let them see it. They didn't ignore my accomplishments. They simply didn't expect them to belong to me. 3 years ago, I sat in a 1-bedroom apartment in Seattle with Corwin. The night was cold and our heat was uneven. We were eating Thai takeout on the floor because our only table was covered in pitch decks and loan applications. I'd just lost a funding round that I thought was locked. Corwin had just paid the lease on a space I wasn't sure I could fill. I remember saying, "If I ever get to the point where I can help this family and they still don't invite me to the table, I won't knock. I'll build my own." And now, standing on grass I paid to fertilize, under a tent that bore my silent sponsorship, I realized I had. I never needed their platform. I was already on mine. Back inside, the final toasts were beginning. Odessa took the mic, all poise and practiced posture. I didn't wait for her to finish. I circled the edge of the room, skirt brushing the floor, as I moved between servers and guests, just out of view. They didn't let me speak. but they were happy to speak on my behalf. I paused just inside the perimeter of the main room, lifted my chin, and said, quietly, clearly, just once, "If this family doesn't stop confusing silence with grace, I will make sure the next generation learns the difference." No one turned, no one reacted, but I knew they heard me. I stepped into the garden, past the cameras, past the smiles, past the version of me they kept trying to rewrite. And this time, I didn't wait for a thank you. I left the room they tried to mute me in, and entered the world I made without them. I stepped deeper into the garden path, letting the applause fade behind me, like a song I'd already heard too many times. My heels crunched lightly on gravel as I circled around the back of the lawn toward the side entrance of the main tent. The air had cooled, but the weight in my chest hadn't lifted. Not yet. The tribute performance was about to begin. I hovered at the edge of the crowd, just far enough to avoid drawing attention, but close enough to hear Odessa step up to the microphone with her usual poise. "We want to take a moment," she said, voice smooth as ever, "to recognize resilience, quiet strength, family that endures, even when things get hard." I could already feel the shift. The lights dimmed to a soft golden hue. A soft instrumental version of a hymn hummed beneath her words. I knew that song. My mother used to play it on Sundays while polishing silver, always humming under her breath. It had never sounded so manufactured. "The decorations you see tonight," Odessa continued, "the beauty, the intention, none of it would have been possible without the generosity of our anonymous benefactors. You know who you are, and we thank you." Anonymous benefactor. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. I whispered under my breath. I bought the chairs they sit in. I bought the champagne they toast with. And still, I'm the ghost in the garden. The applause rolled again. I stood still. A few minutes later, Verlini took the stage. She looked radiant in her pearl-lined gown, one hand holding a delicate note card, the other gesturing with practiced humility. "We believe in learning from the past," she said, "and tonight, we celebrate the journey of growth. Forgiveness. Humility." She turned to me, her voice softening. "And tonight, we honor that journey with a symbol of resilience." Before I could process what was happening, two young cousins, barely teenagers, wide-eyed and eager, approached me. One held a length of deep red velvet. They didn't ask. They simply reached for my hands. I let them. The fabric was familiar. Too familiar. I recognized the stitching. This was custom work from a boutique I used to invest in, back before the board quietly edged me out, and Odessa's name somehow appeared on the shareholder list instead of mine. I felt the velvet wrap gently around my wrists. Not tight, not rough, but real. Camera flashes sparkled. A few guests clapped, confused, then followed the lead of those who nodded solemnly as if this was a sacred rite. Verlene beamed like a monarch presenting a gift to the nation. The photographer leaned in, one flash after another. They had tied me up in a ritual I paid for, a performance I hadn't been asked to join, but couldn't refuse. I stood there for a full 30 seconds before one of the cousins leaned forward to untie me. I stepped down from the platform without a word. I didn't need to make a scene. They'd already written one for me. Later, flipping through the printed event program near the dessert table, I saw my name nowhere. Instead, under evening contributors, Odessa's name stood alone. Beside it, lead creative director, major donor. Under the line marked legacy supporters, Verlene Ashcroft, vision and legacy T. Hale, sponsor in kind. Written in parenthesis. Lowercase, no bold, no recognition. They'd taken everything, not by force, but by formality. I turned to see Verlene at the head table, swirling a glass of Merlot, face relaxed like a woman who had just sealed a business deal and then blessed it with prayer. She glanced in my direction and raised the glass. Not to toast me, but to herself. I left the program folded on the table and walked toward the lawn's edge, just past the main lighting. I took off the ribbon still in my hand. I didn't drop it. I folded it in half and slid it into my coat pocket. Not out of sentiment, out of proof. As I passed the hydrangea hedges, I felt her behind me before I heard her. Verlene. She approached quietly, as if this were a mother-daughter moment and not what it really was. A final cut. "I hope you know this wasn't easy for any of us," she said. I didn't reply. She took a breath. "You were never meant to be our burden. You were an accident your father couldn't refuse." I turned my head just enough to see her face. Calm, controlled, pitying. She didn't wait for a response. She adjusted her shawl and turned away like she'd done me a favor. I stayed where I was, letting her walk off, heels clicking back toward the curated safety of the celebration. I used to wonder if they just didn't know how to love me. But this wasn't ignorance. It was a decision. They wrapped me in symbols of apology and called it tradition. But what they really wanted was a scapegoat with a silent mouth. I didn't move when she left. I stayed at the edge of the platform, the velvet rope that had just been removed, now curled like a shedskin near my feet. The lights had softened to that flattering gold they reserved for photo ops, and Odessa had returned to the microphone for her grand finale. She was thanking the guests, the committee, the unnamed sponsors, always unnamed, as if generosity only counted when it left no fingerprint. The crowd began settling back into their seats. Plates clinked, conversations restarted, and just as Odessa raised her champagne flute, the sound came. A low, smooth hum of an engine. Not rushed, not flashy, controlled. It was the kind of sound that silences a room before the mind can even process why. The valet by the gate took 2 uncertain steps forward. Odessa faltered mid-sentence. Even Verlene, who had worn that perfect smile all night, paused with her fingers halfway to her pearls. The black SUV pulled into view slowly, its headlights cutting across the lawn in long, deliberate sweeps. No one recognized it. It didn't belong to any of the board members or out-of-town relatives. It was foreign, not in make, but in intent. The door opened, and Corwin stepped out. He didn't speak. He didn't adjust his tie. He simply closed the door behind him, walked the short stretch from the driveway to the center of the lawn, and stopped 3 feet from the microphone. You could feel it. The shift. Every eye turned to him like iron to magnet. "Step back," he said to the staffer still standing near the podium. "You've said enough tonight." The poor man, some part-time event assistant, froze, glanced toward Odessa, then stepped aside. Corwin looked at me, not for confirmation, for alignment. Then he reached inside his jacket and pulled out a thin leather folder, opened it slowly, held up the first page like he was testifying in court. "I have a list," he said calmly, "of every invoice tied to this evening. Caterers, stage rentals, flowers, tents, lighting, paid in full, through a company owned entirely by my wife." He didn't look at Odessa when he said it, but she let out a small gasp anyway. A single pearl from her necklace slipped loose and landed with a quiet tick on the stone beneath her heels. Corwin kept speaking. "You thanked anonymous donors. You handed credit to people who contributed nothing but their names. And you did it while tying the one person who paid for all of it to a stage, like she was your redemption." He turned to Merrick, who had already begun to rise from his chair, face pale. "And you," Corwin said, softer now, almost sad. "You accepted those transfers month after month. Mortgage saved, foundation bailout, private school tuition, all labeled from RA Partners. You thought it was me? No, it was her, because she didn't want you to lose your home." The room was still, airless. Verlene opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her eyes darted from Corwin to me, searching for a way to control the narrative, for something to reach for, but there was nothing left within reach. Odessa finally found her voice. "We didn't know," Corwin raised a hand. "That's the problem. You didn't know because you didn't ask, and because she never asked for credit, You assumed she didn't deserve any. Then, quieter, but sharp enough to cut through the night. You used her to make yourselves feel generous. That ends now. He turned to me. My voice didn't tremble when I said, I'm not funding another memory I'm erased from. Someone in the crowd clapped, once, then stopped, as if realizing this wasn't their moment to participate. We didn't linger. Corwin placed the folder on the podium and stepped aside so I could walk forward. I didn't thank anyone. I didn't smile. I just looked at the room. Every face, every relative, every lie. And then I turned toward the exit. We didn't go far, just to the garden's edge. That same gravel path I'd walked a dozen times during childhood, usually when told to cool off or stop making everything about you. Now the path felt earned. Later that night, back at the hotel, I scrolled through social media. Verlene had already posted a photo. Odessa stood beside the stage, smiling like nothing had happened. The caption read, "Tonight we healed, family first, always." I wasn't in the photo. Of course not. The comments flooded in. So beautiful! What a perfect event! Ashcroft class, as always. I didn't comment. I took a screenshot, saved it to a folder I'd labeled Revisionist History, and shut my phone. That's what they do best. Rewrite the ending while the ink's still wet. Morning seeped into the room slowly, one shade of gray at a time. I sat on the edge of the bed, still in the clothes from last night. The phone beside me pulsed with new messages, its vibration a rhythm I no longer danced to. At first, the notifications trickled in. 1 missed call from Merrick, 2 from Verlene, then Odessa. Then one of the family board members I hadn't spoken to since they handed me a patronizing "thank you for your donation" card 5 years ago. I didn't answer any of them. The voicemails played themselves automatically. I heard Verlene's voice first. "We need to discuss what happened last night. That was not the time or place." Then Merrick, sounding more irritated than ashamed. "We're unclear where the escrow balance landed. There's confusion about the third-party contributions." Finally, Odessa, clipped and defensive. "If this is about what Mom said, don't punish everyone for her tone." I held the phone in my hand, not like a weapon, more like evidence. Now that the ribbon had come off, they were finally feeling the weight they used to tie me down. By 9 a.m., I had packed my things. I called the front desk to request my belongings from the estate, only to be met with that tone I knew too well. Fake helpfulness wrapped in protocol. "Ma'am, your room was reassigned. Your items were left with the concierge. A single box. Labeled, Tammy Hale?" I didn't correct her. I just said thank you and made my way down. The box was duct-taped lazily. I didn't open it. I carried it like a prop from a play that had closed early. In the lobby, no one made eye contact. Not the valet, not the receptionist. That was fine. I had looked for their eyes long enough. By noon, I was back in Seattle. Corwin picked me up at the terminal, but we didn't speak until we were home. No small talk, no rehashing. Just the silence that happens between people who have nothing to prove to each other anymore. In my home office, I sat down with a cup of coffee and opened the drawer marked Ashcroft. The file inside was labeled Contributions 2015-2024. Thick, neatly organized. I didn't need to look twice. Page 1, $38,000. Elodie's tuition after Odessa's trust froze due to accounting oversight. Page 2, $72,000. Estate tax penalties covered to prevent public liens. Page 3, $115,000. The silent bailout of Odessa's media project, which she announced at the reunion 2 years ago as self-funded. Final page, $99,000. Logistics, staffing, and overhead for the reunion itself, processed through RA Partners LLC. I didn't feel rage. I felt finished. I opened my email and began typing. 2. Family, ashcroftfoundation.org. Subject, Final Contribution Statement. Over the past 9 years, I've contributed $324 toward family-related expenses and emergency coverage. I did so privately, not anonymously. Effective immediately, all contributions are ceased. This is not open for discussion or renegotiation. All access to my LLC's accounts has been revoked. Any remaining balances are now your responsibility. I attached a PDF summary, clicked send, then deleted the entire thread chain from my inbox. The next 10 minutes were still, almost hauntingly so. No calls, no emails, just stillness. I walked out to the rooftop balcony and sat down. Seattle's sky had that washed-out tone I used to hate, but right then, it felt honest. Not pretending to be blue. Just real. Corwin brought out tea and sat beside me. We didn't fill the silence. We let it hold us. The wind rustled through a potted fern I'd forgotten to water. A plane passed overhead. I could hear a dog barking from 2 floors below. And my chest? It didn't feel tight anymore. I looked down at the wedding band on my hand. Thin, simple, and paid for with shared groceries and startup setbacks. Not gold bought from legacy, just a circle we chose. If love has to be purchased, it was never mine to keep. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel heavy. I just breathed. An hour later, as I rinsed my mug in the kitchen, my phone buzzed once. Just one notification. Not a call, a message, from Elodie. Just 2 lines. Are you okay? Did they hurt you? I read it twice. And for the first time since I'd stepped into that reunion, I smiled. I leaned back against the kitchen counter, phone still in hand, Elodie's message glowing quietly on the screen. Just 2 lines. That was all it took to unravel what days of performance and years of silence hadn't. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I walked to the window, watching the light shift through the blinds. Morning in Seattle had its own rhythm. Muted colors, scattered seagulls, the hum of buses gliding over damp pavement. I watched, unhurried, until the kettle whistled. After I poured the water, I returned to my desk and sat down. I opened my private inbox and typed slowly. 2, Elodie subject. Just checking. They didn't break me, that's enough for now. I hit send. I didn't reread it. In the stillness that followed, I looked around my home. Not the walls, not the furniture, but the corners. The places where memory tends to settle. For years, my space had quietly carried the weight of compromise. Plaques sent by the Ashcroft Foundation, awards never displayed, notes from reunions I never attended. I hadn't noticed how many were still within reach. I stood, walked over to the shelf near the entryway, and pulled out a wooden box. Inside, a brass plate bearing my full name, Tamsin Ashcroft, gifted to me after an internship no one had wanted me to apply for, then used to claim the family encouraged independence. I closed the box, taped it shut, and placed it by the door. I'd drop it off at a donation center after lunch. It wasn't about bitterness, just space, making room for something that hadn't been allowed before. The sun climbed a little higher, cutting across the floor in a perfect line that reached toward my office. I walked down the hallway and opened the door to the mentoring space I'd created over the last year. It wasn't large, but it didn't need to be. 3 chairs, a table with journals and mugs, a corkboard filled with quiet victories, emails, sketches, letters. On the wall above the doorway was a quote I'd printed on thick cardstock and framed myself. Your silence was survival, but your voice is your return. That space had saved me more than once. I'd listened to women talk about being cast out, being told they were ungrateful, too bold, too emotional. I never told them my full story. I didn't need to. They recognized the fragments in my eyes, and I recognized theirs. That afternoon, the chairs filled. A woman named Sarah spoke first. She talked about being the youngest in a family that only spoke when they needed money. Another, Deja, shared about leaving a church that used her past as a warning to others. None of them asked for sympathy. They asked for breath. And that day, they got it. I didn't offer advice. I didn't interrupt. I just listened. After the session ended, I cleaned up slowly. Corwin arrived with lunch, a paper bag filled with grilled chicken salads and 2 bottles of sparkling water. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. We sat on the patio behind the mentoring space. The bench creaked softly as he settled in beside me. The breeze tugged gently at the edge of the tablecloth. I reached for his hand, not out of need, but out of thanks. No one called. No one came. Peace isn't quiet because nothing is happening. It's quiet because no one's trying to convince you that you owe them your place at the table. Later that week, I repotted a small plant I'd grown from a cutting taken off the Ashcroft estate years ago. I'd almost forgotten about it. It had been sickly, barely hanging on in the first few months. But now, it had full green leaves and a stubborn bend in its stem, like it had learned to reach for sunlight from somewhere else. As I placed it on the balcony, I stood for a moment in the soft shade. They built a legacy by silencing people like me. I'll build mine by helping them speak. Not every ending needs an apology. Some just need a beginning that's finally mine. Before we close, let me say this. If you've stayed with me through this story, thank you. I didn't share it for pity or to stir old wounds, but because I know I'm not the only one who's ever been written out of a story they helped build. If you've ever been the quiet one in your family, the one who gave without recognition, the one who was expected to be grateful for scraps while others dined on your effort, know this. Silence doesn't make you weak. It makes you observant. And eventually, it makes you powerful. What I learned is that you don't need applause to matter. You don't need a title to lead. And you certainly don't need permission to walk away from people who only show up when they need something. Sometimes, choosing peace over performance is the loudest decision you'll ever make. So let me ask you, have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Or the one expected to be the bigger person while others rewrite the truth? Tell me in the comments. Let's talk about it. If this story touched something in you, if even a line made you pause, drop a 1 in the comments or share where you're watching from. I'd love to know what part of the country or the world this story found its way to. And if it didn't land with you, that's okay too. Tell me why. I'm here to listen, not just to be heard. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, real, raw, and honest, make sure you hit that subscribe button. This channel is where we speak the quiet truths out loud. Thanks for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next story. Hi, my name's Lealia, and I used to think silence would protect me. Last week, I walked into a bank I helped build and got treated like I was there to clean the floors. My own sister ripped up my withdrawal slip, live-streamed me being searched like a criminal. She called me a fake, a beggar. But the truth? The truth had been buried for years, under family favors, old secrets, and a name no one wanted to remember. Mine. They thought I wouldn't speak, so why now? Why today? That's what I'm about to tell you. Would you have stayed quiet? It's Tate, I corrected quietly. Lealia Tate. The teller blinked once, unmoved. Her manicured fingers hovered above the keyboard as if the wrong pronunciation had drained her interest completely. I could feel the weight of eyes behind me, people shifting in line, glancing down at their watches, annoyed that I dared to slow down their very important mornings. The air inside Regent Crest always smelled the same, a mix of high-gloss wood polish and something expensive trying to smell effortless. I had stood in this very lobby years ago when it opened. Back then, they served champagne at the ribbon cutting. I remembered clinking glasses in the same spot I was now standing. Only no one offered me a drink today. No one offered me anything. I adjusted the strap of my tote bag on my shoulder and placed the withdrawal slip on the counter. $400. Not $4,000. Not $40,000. Just enough to pay the electrician who'd agreed to take cash. That, apparently, made me someone worth dismissing. A security guard near the entrance gave me another glance. I recognized the posture, ready to step in case things got out of hand. But I wasn't making a scene. I wasn't raising my voice. I wasn't even asking for anything more than what was already mine. Is there a problem? I asked, keeping my tone level. The teller pursed her lips. This amount? It's a bit outside our usual threshold for this counter. For small withdrawals, we typically direct clients to the outside ATM. I I said, but it's out of service, and I'm already here. The conversation should have ended there, but instead, I heard the unmistakable sound of stilettos on marble, the sharp, deliberate rhythm of someone who wanted their presence felt before they spoke. I didn't turn to look. I didn't have to. "Lealia," a voice called. "Is that you?" I looked up. There she was, Darla, my sister. She was dressed like the job came with a stylist, deep blue blazer tailored to perfection, her name badge gleaming beneath the Regent crest insignia. Her hair, always too perfectly ironed, curled under at her jawline like a corporate signature. "I didn't recognize you," she said with a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Didn't realize we'd started allowing comfortable clothes in the executive wing?" The words weren't loud, but they were loud enough. One of the men behind me chuckled, that quiet, chesty kind of laugh that doesn't need volume to be cruel. I didn't bite. "Just here to withdraw some cash," I said, my voice still calm. "Nothing more." Darla tilted her head like she was trying to remember who I was, beyond the sibling she hadn't spoken to in months. Maybe years. I wasn't sure anymore. Family time had become more of a PR performance than a genuine tradition. "Of course," she said sweetly. "But do keep in mind, this branch primarily handles high-value clients. You may find our downtown location more accommodating." It was a brush-off disguised as advice. She didn't say I didn't belong here. She implied it. Like always. I glanced over her shoulder. The teller still hadn't moved. "I've had an account here for over 10 years, I said. "I helped open this branch. I'd like to make my withdrawal here." Darla blinked. For a moment, just a flicker, something in her expression shifted. But it vanished just as fast, replaced with the same tight, poised smile. "We'll see what we can do," she said. She turned and walked away, her heels punctuating the silence. I stood there, surrounded by polished surfaces and artificial kindness, wondering how many people had just watched that entire exchange and assumed I was in the wrong. Maybe that I'd wandered into the wrong bank. Maybe that I was someone who didn't understand how places like this worked. They weren't entirely wrong. This place didn't work the way it used to. My eyes wandered to the etched marble wall behind the teller stations. The mission statement was still there, carved in gold lettering I once argued should be understated, not ostentatious. I lost that debate. Funny how much you lose when you're the one doing all the building behind the scenes. A client in line behind me whispered just loud enough for it to sting. "Why is she even here?" I looked down at my shoes. The left lace was frayed, just enough to notice, just enough to judge. From behind the counter, the teller's voice rang out with exaggerated sweetness. "Miss Tate? Is that how you pronounce it?" I lifted my head slowly. "It's Tate," I corrected. "Lealia Tate." I kept my eyes on her back. Because I knew, soon enough, they'd all see who the real imposter was. The teller cleared her throat, forcing a practiced smile. "Whenever you're ready, ma'am," she said, reaching out with just 2 fingers, like I was handing her something contagious. I handed over the slip. The corner was creased from being inside my palm too long. She looked at it, glanced toward the back office window, and her eyes lit up with recognition. Of course! Darla hadn't gone far. Seconds later, I heard the familiar sharp taps of her heels that always hit the ground like she was walking on someone else's time. She emerged from the hallway with a look that said she wasn't here to help me. She didn't ask. She didn't speak. She just took the withdrawal slip straight from the teller's hand. Then, without flinching, she tore it in two. The sound cut through the lobby like glass splitting in slow motion. "We don't waste resources on pocket change," she said loud enough for everyone in the line to hear. My mouth didn't open, but something in my chest cracked. There was a pause, just long enough for the laughter to begin. Not loud, not obnoxious, just the low, rolling kind that spreads through a room when people think they've been given permission to mock. It came from behind me first, then from 2 men near the espresso station, then from a woman scrolling on her phone. I looked straight ahead. Darla leaned on the counter with both hands, The way she used to lean on the kitchen table when we were kids, and she wanted to prove a point without yelling. Honestly, she said with a forced chuckle, I thought this was a prank. You showing up here like this. I said nothing. You used to have standards, she added, her eyes scanning my outfit like it was evidence in a trial. I tilted my head slightly. I still do. The words came out steady but quiet. She narrowed her eyes. You thought this was still your bank? I thought it was, I answered. I thought family might mean something in this building. That's cute, she said, voice clipped. But here, you're just another face at the wrong counter. Behind me, I heard a voice I didn't recognize. Someone go get her a mop, a man said, half laughing. Looks like she came in through the service door. That one got a full chorus of laughter. I didn't flinch. Darla looked pleased. That was always her favorite game, humiliation dressed as professionalism. From the corner of the room, a different sound rose, a quick electronic ding. Not from the bank's system, a phone. I turned just enough to see Monette Claiborne, one of Darla's longtime socialites, holding her iPhone up like it was an award. She was already live. TikTok, probably. Maybe Instagram. I couldn't keep up anymore. Oh, this is gold, Monette whispered, panning the camera. She just tried to withdraw $400 at Regent Crest in a tote bag. She said it with the same tone someone might use if they spotted a stray dog trying to enter a steakhouse. Then she laughed. High-pitched, rehearsed, just loud enough to be heard across the lobby. Ever seen a bank beggar? Today might be your lucky day, y'all, she said to her audience of followers. I glanced at her for a second, long enough for our eyes to meet. Long enough for her to know I heard. Then I turned back to the counter. I didn't speak. I didn't run. And I sure as hell didn't perform. Across the desk, the teller now looked like she didn't want to be involved anymore. Her fingers hovered, waiting for someone else to decide what happened next. That's when Darla leaned in again. You used to be somebody, Lealia, she whispered, venom hidden in sisterly concern. But now, you come in here looking like a checkout clerk from a gas station, begging for walking around money. I stayed still. Is that really what you've become? I looked her dead in the eyes. I became exactly what I needed to be when nobody else showed up. Her face froze for a moment, just a flicker. But she recovered quickly. You don't belong here, she said flatly. My hand rested on the counter. I could feel the wood grain under my fingertips. I helped choose that wood. Imported walnut, sustainable, matte finish. But no one here knew that, not anymore. I scanned the room. The tile beneath me? I helped approve the floor plan. The layout? I suggested 3 versions before they settled on this one. Every inch of this place still carried echoes of my work. But no one saw it. No one remembered. Except for one face behind the teller row. Clara. Young, unsure, but observant. Her eyes met mine. Not pity, not disgust, just confusion, recognition, a question she didn't know how to ask. I didn't smile, but I held her gaze for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Manette's phone dinged again. Notifications, comments, emojis I didn't want to imagine. Darla turned to walk away, but not before tossing out one last blow. This bank doesn't serve imposters, she said, her voice echoing against the marble. I let my eyes fall shut, just for a moment. I didn't need to scream, but I did grip the edge of the counter just a little tighter. Because once the whole room agrees you're worthless, you start wondering if they're right. That thought lingered, heavy and loud, even as the room around me grew noisier. I didn't move. I didn't respond. But I noticed. I noticed how people shifted their weight, how laughter came too easily, how glances grew bolder the longer I stood there. It started with one woman, a tall redhead in a fitted red dress. She tilted her head and looked me over like I was a scratch on her Lexus. Honestly, she said to no one and everyone, she could have come straight from the bus stop. The man beside her, older, with a Rolex he kept adjusting like it was choking him, added, She's dressed like she's here to clean. A third voice, higher, smug, whispered just loud enough. Should we give her a donation jar? Might cover the ATM fee? The laughter that followed didn't erupt. It dripped. Steady, mean, familiar. It was the kind of laugh you hear in school hallways, the kind that stings not because it's loud, but because it's shared. I could feel the flush rising in my neck, but I didn't turn. I didn't make a scene. I stayed right where I was, hands relaxed at my sides, fingers loose, even though everything in me was curled tight. Darla stood off to the side, pretending to read something on her tablet, but her eyes kept darting up, just enough to enjoy the show. Monette had moved to the center of the lobby now, phone angled perfectly for lighting. "Look at the shoes," she said with a grin, zooming in. "Designer look brought to you by Goodwill." Her voice was syrupy, but her words were nails. I didn't have to see her screen to know her feed was buzzing. These days, cruelty came wrapped in hashtags and comments. Then I heard it, sharp and real. "Seriously," a young guy with a Bluetooth earpiece called out. "Can anyone even confirm she's not scamming?" He wasn't asking a question. He was planting a flag. Darla finally looked up, made eye contact with me. "You've created quite a scene, Lilia," she said, smoothing her jacket. "Please don't embarrass our family any more than you already have." I stared at her. "Our family?" I asked, keeping my voice low. "That's rich." She held my gaze for a second, long enough for her cheeks to twitch, but not long enough for her to speak again. Instead, she gave a quick nod to the front desk. One of the younger tellers picked up a receiver. She didn't say much. Just a few clipped phrases, followed by a pause and a final, "Yes, ma'am." That was all it took. A low beep echoed through the security system. It wasn't loud, just a soft signal. But I caught the way one guard straightened, touched the cord on his earpiece, and murmured something into his lapel. Vince, the older security guard, shifted uneasily by the door. He looked at me, eyes hesitant, jaw tight, but didn't move. The other guard, a younger guy, stockier, with something to prove, made his way toward me. His posture told the story before his mouth did. "Ma'am," he said, standing too close, "we just need to do a quick safety check." I tilted my head. "Safety from what?" "Policy," he answered. "Standard procedure." That wasn't true. There was no policy for what they were doing. No policy for humiliating someone while smiling for the cameras. But I didn't argue. He didn't touch me, yet. But the implication hung in the air. The crowd was quiet now. Not because they were ashamed, because they were entertained. You could hear the energy shift, like watching a reality show unfold in real time. I wasn't a person to them. I was content. 10 minutes passed like that. I could feel every second digging into my skin. Then the doors opened. 2 officers walked in, uniformed, calm, and utterly disinterested in the tension they'd just stepped into. No one flinched. In fact, a few people clapped quietly, like their favorite contestant had just made it to the next round. One officer approached me. His partner spoke with the front desk. "Ma'am," he said, "can I see some ID?" I handed it to him without a word. "You matched a vague description we were sent," he said, reading the license. "You're not in trouble. We just need you to cooperate." Darla was standing behind the teller counter now, arms crossed. The corners of her lips twitched, but she wasn't smiling. Not quite. I looked at the officer. "Am I being accused of something?" "Not officially," he said, "but someone flagged suspicious behavior." Of course they did. Suspicious behavior like standing still, like wearing shoes without labels, like being inconvenient to look at. He returned the license. "You're clear." But the damage had already taken hold. Phones were still up. Monette was whispering into her mic, and I had no doubt that whatever came next would be clipped, captioned, and spun into a 30-second takedown of the day's bank drama. I breathed in. Slow, shallow. From somewhere behind me, a voice said, "Even if she's rich, she'll always be trash in that outfit." That one, more than the others, landed. Because it wasn't meant to be funny, it was meant to be final. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. But the last part? That stayed with me longer than I want to admit. She wasn't praying. She was waiting for someone to do the math. And finally, someone did. From where I stood, I could still see Clara at her desk. Low profile, head slightly down, fingers typing with steady rhythm. She didn't look up, not yet. But her posture had shifted. There was purpose in her stillness. She wasn't laughing like the others. Wasn't scrolling or filming or exchanging those glances people pass around like cigarettes, meant to burn, not to share warmth. She stared at her screen longer than needed for a regular check. Then something changed. A subtle tilt of her chin, her brows tightening just a fraction. Whatever she'd pulled up, it wasn't standard. I saw it in her face. She knew. There was a power in that. A quiet one. Not the kind that demands a microphone, but the kind that knows how to hold silence like a loaded gun. Clara leaned back slightly, eyes still on the screen. Her mouth moved, but barely. Not talking, reading, confirming, cross-referencing. And then she froze. Her lips parted for half a second before she caught herself and glanced up, straight at me. We held eye contact. She didn't nod, didn't signal anything, but I felt the shift. Somewhere between the lines of her expression, between the knowledge and disbelief, something had clicked. I turned away before it could linger too long. I didn't want her to draw attention. Not yet. Instead, I took a few slow steps toward the back wall of the lobby. The chatter behind me faded as my focus narrowed. Past the row of teller counters, behind the gold-accented rope barriers, stood a floor-to-ceiling panel of dark marble. At its center, in embossed lettering, was the mission statement of Regent Crest Bank. To serve with excellence, to lead with integrity, to honor our foundation. I used to believe that. In the beginning, when we were choosing paint swatches and debating font families, those words had meant something. They weren't just for press releases or social media banners. They were a promise, a covenant. At least, they were to me. I reached out and let my fingers brush the corner of the steel crest mounted beside the panel, a logo I had designed. A simple arc intersecting a crest, meant to symbolize growth, resilience, and continuity. Now it just looked like branding. But back then, it had come from something real. A sketch on a napkin during a sleepless night, drawn by someone who believed in the kind of place this could be. Someone they'd all decided didn't belong anymore. Behind me, another notification sound chirped. Monette again, probably reacting to a fresh flood of comments. Her voice was softer now, less performative. Maybe the energy in the room had changed, even if they didn't realize it yet. I didn't move. I just stood there, palm pressed to the stone, not out of nostalgia, but to reclaim something that had always been mine. That's when Clara moved. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't make an announcement. She simply clicked one final key, waited, and then reached into a drawer. She pulled out a single printed sheet, folded it once, and tucked it into her blazer. Then she stood. Her eyes scanned the room, not in panic, but in awareness. And then she walked. Not toward me, not toward Darla, but toward the hallway just past the teller booths, where the private offices were. She passed Monette, past the guards, past the line of people still holding their phones and their judgments, and no one stopped her. Clara disappeared down the corridor, and for the first time since this started, I felt it. Momentum. It wasn't big yet, not loud, but it was real, and it was mine. A man 2 seats away cleared his throat. The woman in red who'd laughed earlier pretended to check her watch. No one was filming anymore. I took another look around, just a glance, and stepped aside from the crest, letting my hand fall. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even embarrassed anymore. I was awake, and somewhere, beneath all the noise and cruelty, someone else finally was too. Because silence says more than screaming when the person you dismissed turns out to own the floor you're standing on. I didn't hear Clara speak, but I saw her pause at the edge of the hallway. She slipped through the glass door like she belonged there. The moment passed quickly, nothing dramatic. But the energy in the room had shifted. And so had Vince. He'd been leaning near the front entrance this whole time, just out of frame, invisible in the way older men in uniform often are, until they're not. I saw him glance at me, then at Darla, then at the teller line, and the thin tension still hanging in the air like static. He didn't say anything to anyone. He just turned his body, walked toward the hallway opposite Clara's path, and disappeared through the staff-only exit. No one paid attention. I did. 10 minutes passed. Maybe 12. By then, the lobby had gone strangely quiet. Phones lowered. People started shifting in their seats, unsure whether they were still supposed to be laughing or waiting for the next act. Monette was still scrolling, but she'd stopped narrating. Even Darla was no longer pretending to look at her tablet. And then, like it had all been scripted, the glass front doors opened. No dramatic music, no booming voice, just a man in a gray suit, no tie. Dark dress shoes, not shined to perfection, but clean and firm against the marble. He didn't look rushed. He didn't look curious. He looked like he belonged. Leonard. He stepped into the lobby, calm as the morning sky, and for a second, just a second, everything stopped. I could feel it before I even turned. People noticed. Heads turned, mouths parted slightly. Someone murmured behind me, "Isn't that the guy from Duxford Holdings?" Another voice replied, "That's her husband." Darla's head snapped toward the entrance. Her face drained like someone had pulled the plug from the back of her neck. Leonard didn't address her. He didn't look at anyone. He just walked straight past the seating area, past the teller line, until he stood beside me. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't demand answers. He looked at me and said, quietly, directly, no pity in his voice, "Are you okay?" I looked at him, nodded once. That was enough. Then he turned. To the manager at the front counter. "To whom it may concern," he said evenly, "I'm initiating a full withdrawal, all personal, business, and trust holdings under my name, my companies, and our family foundations." The manager stuttered. "Sir, do you mean now?" Leonard nodded. "Now?" Darla blinked, stepped forward. "Leonard, I think you're overreacting." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look at her. "I'm not reacting," he said. "I'm responding. You allowed them to mock my wife in a space she helped build. That's not something I overlook. That's something I fix." Darla's mouth opened again, but no words came out. The manager fumbled with his screen, clicking, typing. The weight of what was happening had finally begun to land. Someone in the lobby gasped. Not loudly, but enough to be heard. Monette dropped her phone in her lap. A woman who'd made the donation jar comment earlier stood and slowly backed away from the center of the room. Leonard reached into his inside pocket, pulled out a sleek black card, and placed it on the counter. "Process it," he said. The manager reached for it with shaky hands, and then Clara returned. She didn't say anything either. She stepped up beside Leonard, unfolded the printed document from earlier, and placed it carefully next to the card. An account summary, not just for Leonard, but for me. My name, Lelia Tate Duxford, sat clearly at the top of the page. The total? Large enough to give anyone in the room heartburn. Leonard didn't even glance at it. He'd seen it before. This wasn't about proving anything to him. It was about proving it to everyone else. "You'll need to close every associated ledger by noon," he said. Not cruel, not loud, just final. Darla took a step back. She wasn't smirking now. She wasn't anything. She was quiet. The same kind of quiet the rest of the room had fallen into. Not out of respect, out of recognition. The people who had laughed, whispered, recorded, and posted, now watched without a sound. The shift was complete, and I didn't need to say a word. Only this time, I wasn't going to stay quiet about it. Darla had always been good at walking that razor-thin line between cruelty and plausible deniability. In our childhood, she would say something hurtful and follow it with a sweet smile, daring you to challenge her in front of others. At the Thanksgiving table, in parent-teacher meetings, at our mother's retirement party, it was always the same dance. She'd say it wasn't personal, and that made it worse. But today, she crossed that line with both heels and no intention of looking back. Leonard turned to her, his calm still intact. "So tell me, Darla, was it personal?" Her face twitched. Not in panic, not yet, but in recognition. Like she knew the moment of exposure had finally arrived. "You don't have to do this, Leo," she said, reaching for control like it was still somewhere within arm's length. "You're making it personal." He didn't answer, not right away. Instead, he looked at me. I felt the weight of his gaze, but more than that, I felt the permission. For the first time, he wasn't protecting me. He was making space for me to speak for myself. "It wasn't personal," I said, and I didn't raise my voice. "But she made it that way. A long time ago." Darla blinked. Her mouth moved to speak, but nothing came. There are some truths that don't need volume. They just need air. I turned to the room. Not just her. Everyone. Even the ones who had looked away. Especially them. "She almost lost her job 7 years ago," I said. Internal audit flagged a misappropriation of client funds, $38,000, moved from a dormant account into an off-books escrow shell she couldn't explain. I could feel them listening now, every breath behind me held still. "She would have been terminated," I continued, "but someone filed a sealed affidavit, testifying the transfer was an internal misunderstanding." The audit froze. "She kept her title." I glanced back at Darla. "I signed that affidavit," I said. "Me!" The room cracked with gasps. Quiet ones, controlled, but gasps all the same. Darla stepped forward, her voice high, too quick. "That was years ago. I was new to management. I was trying to navigate things without the—" "You were reckless," I said, interrupting her before the revisionist script took hold. "You were drowning, and I handed you the only rope I had. I didn't do it for applause. I didn't even tell Leonard." Leonard remained still. He already knew. The surprise on his face had come and gone years ago when I'd finally explained it to him over dinner one rainy night. "But you knew," I said to Darla. "You knew the truth. And you chose to stand here, in front of these people, and act like I was nothing." Her hands clenched. "I didn't know you'd show up today," she said, quieter. "I didn't know you'd still care." My voice didn't waver. "You didn't know I'd remember." The silence in the lobby thickened. I felt Clara move again. She walked forward, not fast, not hesitant, just steady. In her hands, a document sleeve. She opened it carefully, removed a photocopy of the original affidavit I'd signed. She didn't speak. She placed it on the counter beside the black card Leonard had laid down minutes earlier. That gesture, the simple placement of truth, rang louder than anything said that morning. A man near the velvet rope shifted his stance, eyes now cast downward. The woman who'd mocked my tote earlier started fiddling with her necklace chain. Monette opened her phone, but the screen stayed dim. Her live stream had ended, and she didn't dare start another. I looked back at Darla. "You asked if I still cared," I said. "What I care about is clarity. What I care about is memory." Darla's eyes glistened, not with tears, with calculation. She was scanning the exits, not the physical ones, but the narrative ones, trying to find a story she could still spin. There were none. Clara finally spoke. "I found the original account logs," she said softly. "Her name's listed under a legacy tier, founder level. You don't get there by mistake." Darla didn't respond. Leonard crossed his arms, said nothing. He didn't need to, because I had already said enough. And the room, the one that once laughed, now it remembered something it had chosen to forget. I took one step forward, closer to Darla. Close enough that she didn't have to pretend we weren't sisters. "You showed them who you are today," I said. And then Leonard turned to me, his voice low. What do you want to do next? I didn't pause. Nothing more, I replied. She's already shown them who she is. They just watched. Like they finally understood they never really saw me. I didn't wait for anyone to speak. I walked to the far end of the counter, away from the noise, away from Darla's silence and Monette's downcast gaze. A strange kind of stillness had settled over the room, like whatever had filled the air all morning. Judgment, cruelty, smug amusement had finally collapsed under its own weight. Behind me, Clara moved with a purpose that didn't need permission. She stepped behind the teller counter, pulled a presentation tablet from a locked drawer, and without a word, connected it to the bank's overhead display. The large digital screen flickered once, then twice, before settling into a dark navy blue background. She tapped quickly through a few folders, stopped, and opened one labeled Founding History, Internal Use Only. I didn't know she had access to that. When the document loaded, the silence cracked. There, in bold white lettering across the center of the screen, it read, Lealia Tate, Strategic Co-Founder, Original Land Deed, Signatory. Gasps, actual, audible gasps, rippled through the room like a low wave. Someone, maybe the man in the gray blazer, who'd laughed earlier, whispered to himself, Wait, she helped build this? Clara stood to the side, hands folded in front of her. She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. I heard a ceramic cup shatter softly. A woman, client, upper 40s, tailored dress and pearls, had dropped her espresso. It dripped down the counter, pooling near a stack of financial brochures. Nobody moved to clean it. Then came the video. Clara swiped to another folder and opened the internal feed. A screen-in-screen combination of two clips. One was the live security camera from earlier. The other, Monette's live stream. The moment Darla leaned in and called me a fake beggar, the room stilled further. The words, her words, played again on the screen above us all. Captions auto-generated below the video. This bank doesn't serve imposters. The same lobby that had erupted in soft chuckles and half-hidden grins 2 hours ago now sat frozen beneath the weight of their own complicity. The screen zoomed out again. Clara tapped once more, bringing up a scanned image, a legal document bearing 2 signatures. One was Leonard's, the other was mine. The deed to the land where this building sat. My name, written in my own hand, unmistakable, Lealia Tate Duxford. Leonard walked toward the screen, not quickly, but with the quiet confidence that made people get out of his way without him asking. He took a hard copy from his briefcase. The same deed, placed it in front of the manager, beside the account summary. No words. Then he turned and stood beside me. I stepped forward, finally speaking, not to the crowd, not to Darla, but to the space between us. You were right, I said. I didn't look like I belonged here today. The words hung in the air, just long enough for someone to mistake them for concession. But that's only because none of you ever looked close enough. I didn't raise my voice, didn't point or scold. I just spoke the truth and let it rest on their shoulders. Vince stepped forward, his hands clasped in front of him like a man standing in front of a grave. Ma'am, he said softly, I didn't know. He meant it. I gave him a small nod. That's the thing about assumptions. They feel like facts until they're proven wrong. The woman who had compared me to a janitor earlier looked down at her heels. Monette still hadn't picked up her phone. Darla stood off to the side, pale and silent, her arms wrapped around herself like she'd just realized how cold the room really was. Leonard didn't look at her when he spoke next. This is your last day under my name, he said. His voice was low, measured. After today, your employment ends. Darla's lips parted, but she didn't form words. Her eyes shimmered, but no tears fell. Not yet. And I didn't look at her either. I turned toward the door instead. The same door they had nearly shoved me through not even an hour earlier. This time, nobody tried to stop me. They just watched. Like they finally understood they never really saw me. I walked with purpose, not defiance, not bitterness, but certainty. Each step toward the glass doors felt like a small, deliberate reclaiming of space that had once been mine. My heels didn't echo sharply across the marble floor the way Darla's always had. Mine made no statement. They simply carried me out. Nobody said a word. Vince stepped to the side without hesitation, holding the door open with the quiet dignity of a man who knew he'd stood on the wrong side of something, but wanted to do one thing right before the end of the day. I didn't thank him aloud, but I nodded. Once. That was enough. Monette shifted in her chair, adjusting her purse like it weighed more than it did. She opened her mouth, closed it. Her phone, dark now, sat forgotten on her lap. Not a single one of her followers could help her explain what had just happened here. A few clients lowered their eyes when I passed, the way people do when they recognize shame in someone else, but aren't ready to acknowledge it in themselves. The doors opened, and I paused. Not for dramatic effect, but because I wanted to choose my moment. This time, I would leave on my own terms. I turned, not to the people, not to Darla, but to the building, to the walls. The floor I had once helped lay, the branch I had helped open, the crest I had designed. I let my palm rest on the edge of the door, cool, polished glass, before I spoke. Next time someone walks in asking for $400, I said, voice low but steady, don't check their shoes, check your memory. I let that settle. Then, one last breath. One final note for the ones still pretending. And for the record, I never cleaned your floors. I designed them. No gasps this time, just stillness. And that silence? That was the real sound of dignity. I stepped outside. The sun was high now, not quite noon. The breeze hit my face the way a gentle truth does. Familiar, never forced. Leonard joined me moments later. He didn't say anything right away. Just stood beside me, one hand in his pocket, the other lightly touching my back. Not to lead, not to comfort, just to let me know he was there. The car door opened. Vince had already radioed ahead. Of course he had. But I didn't get in right away. Instead, I looked back one last time. Not at the people, not at my sister, at the glass facade of the bank. The reflection staring back at me wasn't proud. It wasn't vengeful. It was done. Not broken, not bruised, just done. My thoughts wandered. To the first blueprint I reviewed for this branch. To the late nights drafting projections while Darla went to mixers and networking brunches. She always hated numbers, but she liked credit. I remembered her, once, younger, smiling in her office the day I handed her the founding paperwork to sign. Her name in second position, mine in first. She didn't thank me then. She wouldn't now. But that's the thing about giving. You do it because it's in you, not because it's ever guaranteed to be returned. Leonard's voice broke the moment gently. Where to now? He asked, his tone light but respectful. I didn't answer right away. I let my eyes drift across the street. There was a small cafe, one I'd walked past a dozen times but never entered. A place that smelled like citrus and new beginnings. Somewhere I don't have to prove I exist, I said. The door shut behind me with a soft, hydraulic sigh, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. I felt seen, not by them, but by myself. 3 days passed without fanfare. No reporters camped on our lawn, no dramatic confrontations, just a quiet kind of ripple that kept moving, even after we'd left the building behind. Leonard spent most of that time on calls. Lawyers, foundation boards, private financial teams handling the fallout from his decision. I didn't ask for updates. I didn't need them, because something bigger was happening out there, and I didn't have to control it for it to be real. It started online, as things always do now. The video Monette had posted, the one meant to humiliate me, was reshared, recaptioned, recontextualized. Only now it was called, "They mocked the co-founder." It wasn't just the views. though those came quickly. Over 1 million in under 72 hours. It was the comments. Thousands of them. Some confused, some furious, and some just quiet gratitude. This woman is grace in a war zone. Proof that being silent doesn't mean being weak. I've worked in corporate America 30 years. I've seen this happen in 100 different lobbies. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Sometimes the world gets the lesson without the teacher standing at the front of the room. Regent Crest issued a press release by the second morning. Effective immediately, Ms. Darla Whitcomb is no longer employed by Regent Crest Private Banking. We are conducting an internal review of past conduct. They didn't say my name. They didn't have to, because the internet already had. By the end of the week, an anonymous Reddit post surfaced. It linked back to a whistleblower complaint from years ago, one that had gone mysteriously unresolved. Users connected the dots faster than any journalist ever could. Screenshots, file archives, a 6-year-old audit trail that traced directly to Darla's desk. By the time the actual story broke in a mid-sized finance blog, her name was already trending, but not for the reasons she used to brag about. The ripple reached deeper. People in her orbit, the board members she'd courted, the women she'd lunched with, the charities she'd smiled for, went silent. One by one, they stopped returning her calls. Monette unfollowed her on every platform, erased every photo they'd taken together at galas and golf fundraisers. No public outrage, just disappearance. And that, in some ways, was the sharpest wound. But none of it came from me, because I had already left. On the third afternoon, I sat in our garden. Leonard was reading a book across from me, his feet stretched out, one hand holding a cup of tea. I was kneeling beside the bonsai, pruning gently. That little tree had taken years to shape, not into what I wanted, but into what it was always meant to be. He glanced up. You could have burned the whole thing down. I didn't look at him. They burned themselves. I just stopped shielding them from the spark. His mouth curved at the edge, not quite a smile. More like an acknowledgement. We didn't need to say more. That evening, after he went inside, I opened a drawer in the hallway I hadn't touched in months. Inside was a letter, written years ago. The ink had faded in some places, the folds soft from being opened and closed so many times. I had written it the week after Darla's audit scandal. I never mailed it. It read, I don't need you to thank me. I just need you to stop pretending I never stood behind you. I covered your mistake because I still believed you could rise above it, but I can't carry the weight of someone who insists on pretending they were never helped. I read it once more, then carried it to the backyard. I didn't shred it. I didn't bury it. I lit a single match and watched the edges curl and blacken in the fire pit. There was no rage in it, no ceremony, just letting go. That's the thing about some scars. They don't scream. They just glow, quietly, reminding you of what you've survived. Later that night, I sat in bed, the window open beside me, the wind slipping in like a quiet song. I whispered a thank you, not to anyone in particular, just for the peace, not the kind that's given to you, the kind you choose to take back. Hello? My name is Lorene. 3 years ago, while I was lying in a hospital bed, unable to speak, barely alive, my sister emptied my bank accounts, forged my name, and started selling everything I'd ever worked for. She told everyone she was taking care of me, but behind the scenes, she was cashing in on my silence. What would you do if the person you trusted most treated your coma like a golden opportunity? And what if the rest of your family believed her? Would you forgive them? Would you fight back? Or would you let them bury you before you're even gone? I don't remember hitting the floor. 1 second I was reaching for a coffee mug, and the next thing I saw was a spinning ceiling and the faint outline of the refrigerator door. The rest is just noise, footsteps, voices, beeping. I remember the cold touch of the gurney. Then, nothing. When I came to, I was lying in a hospital bed under sterile white lights, a blanket pulled tight around my legs. I could hear voices down the hallway. The rhythm of machines echoed around me, keeping track of everything I couldn't control. I tried to speak, to call out, ask a question, say anything, but nothing came. My lips parted, but the words didn't follow. Just silence. Not even a whisper. I wasn't dead, but I couldn't prove I was still here. That was the scariest part. A nurse, her name tag read Jamie, noticed my eyes fluttering and smiled kindly, then leaned over to adjust my oxygen and said softly, "You're in Grant Medical, sweetie. Looks like you had a minor stroke, but you're stable now. Just need to rest, okay?" I blinked once. That was all I could manage. She kept talking like I was fully awake, which I appreciated more than she knew. "Your sister's on her way," Jamie added as she adjusted my IV. "She said she'll handle everything for now." Everything. I didn't think much of it until Velda walked in, arms full of flowers, wearing that smile she always put on when other people were watching. It was the same expression she used at Mom's funeral when reporters came. Warm, appropriate, just the right amount of sorrow. Velda was always good at putting on a face. "Oh my God!" she said with a practiced gasp, walking to my bedside like she'd sprinted here. "Lorene, you scared the hell out of us!" I blinked again. My hands wouldn't respond. My throat still locked. She leaned down, brushing my hair back like we were close. "We weren't. Don't worry about anything," she whispered, her voice low now, like it was just between us. "I've already started making a few calls. I'll make sure everything is taken care of." That phrase again. Everything. The next few hours passed in a fog. Nurses came and went, running their charts. Velda stayed, chatting with the doctors like she'd done it all before. She corrected them on details of my medical history. She answered questions about my insurance, my emergency contacts. By mid-afternoon, she was listed as my primary contact in the system. I watched it all unfold, helpless. She wasn't crying, not once. That evening, when Jamie returned, I motioned toward the phone on the wall with a slight tilt of my head. My muscles ached, but I was determined. Jamie understood. "You want to check something?" she asked. I blinked once. She helped prop up my phone on a tray table and opened my banking app. Slowly, clumsily, I tapped in my password with shaky fingers. The screen loaded. My checking account balance blinked back at me. $47.82. I blinked again. Once, twice. Refreshed the screen. Same number. I moved to savings. 0.0. I felt the pressure in my chest rise. I opened my investment portal. Two-factor authentication blocked me. I'd never set that up. My heart pounded. Not from the stroke. Not from fear. From clarity. Something was very, very wrong. I looked up at Jamie, my lips trembling, unable to form the words I needed. "I'm sure it'll all make sense soon," she said, mistaking my look for confusion. She patted my hand gently. "Your sister said she's handling things. You just focus on resting." I stared at the ceiling above me. Those little squares, the acoustic tiles, suddenly became a grid, one I was trapped beneath. I waited. The next day passed. No call from my father, no text from my cousin, nothing from my neighbor, Ellen, who never missed a chance to check in. My phone showed nothing but spam calls and a single message. From Velda. "Rest. We'll handle everything." That word again. It echoed in my mind like a curse. Everything. That's what she wanted. She didn't think I'd wake up. She was acting like I never would. And no one was questioning her. Not the hospital, not the family, not the bank, clearly. As if I had already disappeared, and she was just cleaning up. I wasn't gone. Not yet. I stared back up at the ceiling and let one thought burn a hole through the fog still clinging to my mind. The thought kept looping in my mind as night fell, like a slow drip from a leaky faucet. Constant, unavoidable. I wasn't gone, not yet. But I had a sinking feeling Velda was already living like I was. The next morning, a nurse came in to check my vitals. She smiled as she adjusted the monitors, then casually added, "Your sister stopped by early this morning. Said she needed to go take care of a few things at home. Home. That word hit differently now. Once she left, I reached for my phone. My hands still trembled, but I managed to unlock it. No missed calls, no texts, just a string of unread notifications from Facebook. I tapped one open and nearly dropped the phone. There I was, my own face. An old picture Velda must have dug up from some Christmas dinner years ago. The kind where we sat at the same table but barely exchanged a word. In the photo, I was smiling. I remember it clearly because that smile was for a neighbor who'd told a joke, not for Velda. And now it was being used as bait. My brave little sister, still fighting. Please keep her in your prayers. We're doing everything we can to save her. Hundreds of likes, dozens of comments. People I hadn't spoken to in years were pouring in sympathy for Velda, praising her strength, calling her a saint. And at the bottom, a link. Help me save my sister. GoFundMe. She wasn't just mourning me preemptively, she was monetizing it. I opened the link. The campaign had already raised over $18,000. The description was filled with poetic phrases Velda couldn't have come up with on her own. Every dollar helps. Hospital bills are piling up. I've left work to care for her full time. What work? She hadn't held a steady job in years, but the part that got me, really got me, was at the end. Even if she doesn't wake up, I want to do right by her. Even if. That wasn't a sister hoping for my recovery. That was a woman hedging her bets. I set the phone down, trying not to shake. But the room suddenly felt smaller. Not because of the walls, but because the world outside no longer saw me as present. Velda had taken my voice, and now she was borrowing my image too. Hours passed. Another day blurred by. Still no messages from Dad? No call from Ellen down the street. Just more people commenting, tagging each other, sharing the post like it was a charity telethon. Even a few old clients from my design days left sweet notes. One even wrote, "Velda, you've always been the strong one." The strong one? She couldn't handle a grocery list without panicking, but now she was being canonized. Later that evening, a nurse named Rena entered to do the evening rounds. She was brisk but kind, told me I was making good progress, and might start speech therapy soon. As she was about to leave, she said, "Your sister dropped off some flowers. She mentioned you loved daisies?" I don't. Velda does. After Rena left, I picked up the phone again, scrolled back through the post. Then the donation list. She'd made herself the sole organizer. The account was tied directly to her personal bank. She hadn't even bothered to mask it under a foundation or separate account. I started taking screenshots, one by one. Every donation, every message, every update she made. I opened a note app and began a timeline. Not because I knew what I'd do with it yet, but because something inside me whispered, "You'll need this." By the end of the night, I had compiled almost 40 screenshots. I organized them by date, labeled the folders by topic. I didn't know if anyone would believe me later, but at least I'd have my side of the story, ready to be told. No one had called me, but that didn't mean I was alone. Velda had taken my voice, but I still had my mind. The next morning, as light leaked through the blinds and a cart clattered down the hallway, I stared at the phone beside me. Its screen was dark, still and quiet, just like the people I thought I mattered to. No new texts, no voicemails. Just the digital trail Velda had been carefully curating to the rest of the world. But inside these four walls, the truth sat heavy on my chest. And my silence wasn't from weakness anymore. It was from watching them rewrite my story before I even had a chance to finish it. While I waited for the nurse to return with my breakfast tray, I opened the folder on my phone where I'd saved the screenshots. Scrolling through the photos, the fake captions, the donation amounts, the praise Velda was soaking in like bathwater, I caught sight of a name I hadn't seen in years. My ex-coworker, Janice. Her message read, "Velda, you've always been so selfless. Lorene's lucky to have you." That's when it hit me. They didn't just believe her lies. They preferred them, easier to digest, neater. My quiet strength had never been loud enough to earn applause. But Velda's drama? Her curated sadness? That was compelling. Before I could spiral any further, a knock tapped on the doorframe. Jamie, one of the daytime nurses, peeked in with the hospital's old beige landline in her hand. "Hey, Ms. Raskin. Someone named Holton. Said she used to live across from your mom's place. She asked if she could speak with you." I nodded quickly. Jamie helped press the phone to my ear. "Lorene, it's June Holton, sweetheart." Her voice hadn't changed, a warm rasp, like someone who still smoked menthols and drank sweet tea out of mason jars. "I didn't want to bother you, but I saw Velda outside your mama's house yesterday. She was with a real estate agent, had a sign and everything. Is that house not still in your name?" I couldn't answer, but I didn't need to. The silence must have said enough. "Oh, honey," June murmured. "I just thought you should know." I squeezed the receiver, my nails biting into my palm. I mumbled a soft thank you before Jamie helped me set the phone back on the table. After she left, I sat in that room, the beeping of machines fading to a dull hum behind the roar in my head. My mother's house, the house I had moved back into to care for her, bathe her, feed her, sleep in a chair beside her bed for months, while Velda sent thinking of you texts and excuses from the city. That house wasn't just real estate, it was sacrifice. It was a promise. I opened my tablet and pulled up a browser. The Wi-Fi here was slow, but it didn't take long to find it. There it was. Charming two-bedroom cottage on a quiet tree-lined street. Perfect starter home. Price to move at $285,000. Below the description was a contact email, velda.whitcomb@gmail.com. She didn't even try to hide it. I swallowed hard, not out of shock, but because the numbness I'd been clinging to was starting to burn away, replaced by something sharper. She was selling our mother's house. My house. Without a word. I took a screenshot, then another. I saved the listing and attached it to the folder where I had been collecting her lies. I opened my notes app and added a line under the timeline. 10:32 a.m. Zillow listing found. Velda's email as contact. That folder was getting thicker by the hour. I laid the tablet down and looked out the window. Down below, in the hospital's parking lot, cars came and went. People passed with coffee cups and visitors' badges, unaware that upstairs someone was being erased. Quietly, politely. I thought back to the last time Velda and I were in that house together. It was the week before Mom passed. Velda showed up for exactly 2 nights. She brought wine, told stories, laughed too loud. She barely noticed the smell of medication in the air or the sound of the oxygen machine cycling through its labored rhythm. And when she left, she kissed Mom on the cheek and whispered, "Let me know when it's over." But I stayed. When Mom stopped eating, when her hands curled up from arthritis, when she confused me with Velda, when she finally slipped away during a rainstorm, her hand in mine. I stayed. Velda wasn't there for the hard parts. She didn't earn that house. But now she was pocketing it like spare change. I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I picked up my phone and pressed record. I narrated the Zillow listing aloud, then added a voice note about June Holton's call. I explained the house's significance, the care I'd provided, the lies being stacked against me. I saved it all. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about record-keeping. She'd written me out of the narrative, but I was rebuilding my version, one receipt at a time. That afternoon, after the nurse brought my lunch tray and adjusted the blinds, I stayed quiet. Not because I had nothing to say, but because silence was the only power I still had. I let them all believe I was too foggy, too frail to notice anything. I wasn't. My speech hadn't returned fully yet, but my mind, sharp. Maybe sharper than before. As the machines beeped steadily beside me, I used one finger to open my email, slowly swiping through old financial messages, anything that might help me piece things together. I wasn't sure what I was looking for until I saw it. A subject line. Confirmation of new power of attorney, approved. My breath caught in my throat. I tapped it open with my trembling hand. It was from my investment firm. The attachment was a PDF, a signed document showing Velda as my legal representative, with full control over all my assets. It had my signature, my name, in my handwriting. Only I never signed it. The date? The same day I was admitted to the ICU. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, not from fear, but clarity. I zoomed in on the signature. It looked like mine, close enough for someone who hadn't seen me sign a check in years. But I could tell. The pressure points were wrong. The slant wasn't mine. The curl on the L was too neat. She forged my name. Not just to call herself helpful, not just to play hero. Velda legally took control of everything I had while I was unconscious. This wasn't exaggeration. It wasn't a mistake. It was fraud. I didn't panic. I didn't cry. I saved the document. After dinner, which I barely touched, I asked Jamie, my nurse, if she could help me make a call from the landline. She smiled and nodded, dialing for me. I mouthed the name and the number, holding up shaky fingers. Jamie offered to stay in the room, but I shook my head. She gave me privacy and stepped out. The dial tone rang. Twice. Then a voice picked up. "Jerome Faulkner," the voice said. I closed my eyes and steadied my breath, then whispered, slow and hoarse. "It's Lorene." A pause. Then, calm but firm. "I've been waiting for this call." I told him everything I knew so far. My voice was low, broken in places, but I made sure the facts were clear. The donation page, the Zillow listing, the power of attorney. Jerome listened, didn't interrupt. When I finished, he asked me 3 questions. Specific, legal, tactical. I answered them all. Then he said, "I'll handle it from here. But Lorene, you cannot let her know you're aware of any of this. Not yet." I agreed, not because I wanted revenge, because I needed to protect what was left. That night, I didn't sleep. Instead, I set up a new email thread on my tablet. I labeled it Reclaim. Into it, I dropped every screenshot, every photo, every forwarded email. I set permissions so only Jerome and I could access it. I created backup copies on 2 separate drives. While the hospital lights buzzed overhead and the hallway fell silent outside my door, I crafted the beginning of something new. A quiet record, not of pain, but of proof. Velda had always been sloppy when she felt victorious. She thought she had won, that I wouldn't recover, that if I did, I'd be too disoriented to do anything about it. She was wrong. Jerome started by flagging my bank accounts and investment portfolios. He contacted the institutions directly, leveraging our long-standing power of attorney agreement, the real one, drafted years ago when I was healthy and clear-minded. The institutions responded quickly. 2 of them had already noticed unusual activity. One had denied a recent transfer request from Velda, citing signature inconsistencies. Jerome told me he was requesting documentation under subpoena, preparing a civil injunction if necessary. I didn't need to understand every step, just that the wheels were turning. Later that week, Jamie mentioned that Velda had stopped calling the nurses' station. "She said she's been too busy managing things," she laughed. I smiled, but only on the inside. Velda had no idea. She thought she'd taken me out of the picture, but in reality, I was stepping behind the curtain, preparing the kind of response that doesn't make noise, but lands hard. Before I closed my eyes that night, I typed a single line into the top of the Reclaim email chain. If she takes one more step, the trap will close, and I won't be the one bleeding. Morning sunlight pushed through the slats of the blinds, painting faint lines across the foot of my bed. It had been days since I'd spoken a full sentence, and somehow that quiet gave me more power than 1,000 arguments ever could. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was loaded. Jamie came in mid-morning with my meds and a new nurse trailing behind her, a soft-spoken guy named Jasper. He was young, maybe early 30s, but carried himself like someone older, quiet, efficient, not the chatty type, which I appreciated. As he checked the monitors and made notes on his tablet, he smiled politely and said, almost offhandedly, "We adjusted your resuscitation status back to full code yesterday." I blinked. Full code? I hadn't known it had been anything else. He must have noticed the shift in my expression, because he stopped writing and looked directly at me. "Your sister had previously signed a DNR form on your behalf," he said carefully. "Do not resuscitate. Said you two had talked about it. But when your neurological assessments started to improve, we reviewed everything and updated it. Just so you know." I stared at him, unmoving. She signed a DNR. Without my knowledge. Without my consent. And she told them we'd discussed it. We hadn't. Not once. I gave Jasper the smallest nod I could manage, then closed my eyes. Not from fatigue, but to steady the fire now rising in my chest. That woman had walked into this hospital, looked the staff in the eye, and told them to let me die quietly. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was survival. By early afternoon, I was able to hold the hospital tablet long enough to check my encrypted email again. I opened a new message from Jerome. His response was short but direct. "Confirmed. Velda transferred the Woodland Hills duplex into her name. Escrow closed 3 days after your admission. Signature matches previous forgery. Deed recorded under her personal trust." I didn't even flinch. The duplex was a small investment property I'd bought 6 years ago. Nothing grand. A rental with 2 tenants and a modest income stream. I'd kept it under my name, paid the property taxes, and updated the insurance myself every January. She stole that too. I exhaled slowly and emailed Jerome back. "She's crossing every line she thinks I can't see. It's time to mark a boundary." An hour later, after the evening medication round, I used voice to text and dictated the message I wanted Jerome to send. "If there is one more unauthorized transaction, we escalate. No more waiting. Civil litigation. Formal proceedings. Full discovery." I didn't ask for approval. I didn't need to. That night, Jerome sent Velda a preliminary legal notice. Nothing too loud. Just a nudge. A reminder that someone was watching, and that the person she thought was gone was not. He copied me discreetly. No reply came from her end. The next morning, Jamie brought breakfast, and Jasper returned for vitals. As he took my blood pressure, he spoke softly. "I read through your updated directive," he said. "You're listed now as your own medical decision-maker again. Just wanted you to know. We cleared Velda's access yesterday." That single sentence gave me more strength than any medication. I opened my growing digital folder and added the title transfer documents Jerome had forwarded. Then I saved Jasper's statement as a note, marked with the date and time. There was no confrontation, no shouting, just methodical preparation. I wasn't building a wall, I was setting a trap, a quiet one. By late afternoon, I was able to sit up for longer stretches without needing assistance. I moved slower than I wanted, but my focus was sharper than ever. That night, with the room dim and the machines humming low, I stared at the ceiling and visualized each piece of evidence I'd gathered so far. I played Velda's moves like a chessboard, each forgery, each lie, each theft. I wasn't angry, not in the explosive way Velda probably expected. I was cold, focused. This wasn't vengeance, this was preservation. When Jamie came in to check on me before her shift ended, she leaned over and said gently, "You've been real quiet lately. I don't know if you know this, but quiet people usually come back with a roar." I smiled. Only on the inside. Because I wasn't roaring. I was listening. To everything she thought I'd miss. Every careless step. Every smug assumption. Every time she said, "Don't worry, I'll handle it." Velda didn't know it yet, but the line had already been drawn. Not in ink, not in blood, but in cold, documented precision. The next morning came quietly. The nurses moved through the halls like shadows, their shoes barely audible on the polished floor. The usual hospital murmur was comforting in its own strange way. Steady, predictable, unlike the storm brewing just outside these walls. Jerome's call came just after breakfast. Jamie had just cleared my tray when the hospital landline rang. She handed it to me with a wink and a whispered, "Same guy?" I nodded, holding the receiver with both hands. My grip steadied the second I heard his voice. "She did it again," Jerome said, not bothering with greetings. "Life insurance, your father's. She filed a beneficiary change, removed you and Daniel, listed herself as the sole recipient." My jaw clenched, but I didn't interrupt. The form was processed through a Cleveland agent. She used the hospital POA again, same forged copy. But this time, the agent flagged something. "We're following the thread now." I leaned back into the pillow, eyes fixed on the ceiling tiles. It was like watching someone walk deeper into a trap they didn't know was there. She kept going, not because she needed to, but because she couldn't help herself. Jerome continued, "We're compiling everything, but this one's going to hit harder than the last." I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. By midday, he emailed me a link, private, password protected. Surveillance footage from the investment office where Velda had handled the property transfer weeks earlier. I tapped the video open on the hospital tablet. There she was. Velda, in a too-neat blazer, smiling like she owned the building. A man in a gray suit followed close behind, middle-aged, balding, carrying a leather briefcase. Jerome later identified him as a legal consultant, not a licensed attorney. Likely someone Velda found online to help her appear credible. In the video, she handed over a document folder. The receptionist scanned the paperwork and pointed to a signature line. Velda didn't hesitate. She mimicked my name, almost too perfectly, and handed it back. I watched her fake my signature without flinching. Fraud, clear as day. Not a misunderstanding, not a mix-up, fraud. I closed the tablet and set it down gently. Later that evening, after shift change, the new nurse helped me sit upright. I asked for privacy again and turned on the recorder app on my phone. I watched the surveillance footage a second time, this time narrating it for my own records. "She's walking in with intent," I said. Not nervous, not rushed. She knew exactly what she was doing. When I finished, I filed the recording into my digital folder under a new title, Final Straw. The next morning, Jerome called again. "We're ready," he said. "Time to send the paperwork." And just like that, the line was crossed. That afternoon, Velda received a hand-delivered cease and desist. Inside the envelope, a demand for full asset restitution, immediate account freezes, and notification that civil and criminal proceedings were now in motion. We didn't ask for her side. We didn't invite discussion. It was not a negotiation. It was notice. I pictured her opening the letter, standing in her kitchen, probably still wearing her worn silk robe she loved to parade during family holidays. I imagined her face falling as she read the legalese. The slow realization that she wasn't invisible anymore, that the person she thought she'd erased had returned in the most inconvenient form possible. Undeniable evidence. She didn't call, didn't text. For the first time since I'd landed in that hospital bed, Velda went quiet. I didn't celebrate. There was no victory dance, no dramatic music cue. Instead, I took the signed affidavit Jerome had faxed for my records, folded it neatly, and slid it into the drawer next to my bed. Not because I needed to hold it, because I wanted to remind myself, this wasn't about punishment. It was about truth. And for the first time in weeks, I finally felt it settling into place. The next afternoon, just as the sun began to lower behind the brick buildings outside my window, my phone buzzed. Not a call, just a text. It was from Tallis, my cousin, one of the many people who had liked and shared Velda's updates without hesitation. "Lorene, can we talk?" I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I replied with a single word. "Yes." We arranged for a call. Jamie helped connect us through the hospital's secure line later that evening. When Tallis's voice came through, it carried a nervous energy I hadn't heard since we were kids sneaking sodas behind Grandma's back. "I don't know what's true anymore," she said without preamble. I supported her because, well, she made it sound like she was all alone in this. Like she was fighting for you. I didn't respond. I let the silence do the work. That was until she said something yesterday that didn't sit right. We were talking about estate stuff, hypotheticals, and she said, "Lorene can't speak. She won't even know what's been moved around." Tallis paused. She said that, Lorene, like it was just normal. My chest tightened, but my tone stayed even. I whispered, "Can you send me anything?" 10 minutes later, she texted over screenshots, messages between her and Velda, casual, careless, damning. Velda had bragged about wrapping things up before I even regained full consciousness. That night, I looped Jerome in. I told him about Tallis. He didn't hesitate. "She'll be part of the meeting." "The meeting?" I asked. "We're setting one up," he said. "Formal mediation. You'll attend via video call. I'll be there in person. We're also inviting Edwina Carr." That name made me sit up straighter. Edwina was my mother's oldest friend, the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday and still sent handwritten cards. She'd been at our house the week before Mom passed, when Velda showed up briefly and left early, as usual. Jerome continued. "Edwina said something you need to hear yourself." By Friday morning, we were ready. Jerome wheeled in a hospital-grade tablet and set it on the rolling table at my bedside. Tallis was already logged into the video call, seated in what looked like her home office. She gave me a tight, awkward smile, like someone sitting on both guilt and relief. Next to her was Edwina. Older now, with snow-white hair pulled into a tight bun, she still held herself like a schoolteacher who didn't tolerate nonsense. She nodded at me through the screen. Then Velda arrived. The screen shifted to a new camera angle, Jerome's office. Velda walked in wearing a navy blue suit that didn't fit her quite right. Too tight at the shoulders, too stiff at the waist. She didn't say hello. She sat down across from Jerome with that same look she always wore in public, calculated poise. "I don't see the point in this," she said as she smoothed her jacket. "I've already explained everything in writing." Jerome didn't respond. Instead, he pressed a button and began playing the file. The video flickered to life, grainy but clear. It was my mother, sitting in her old armchair, the one by the window with the frayed edges. Her voice was softer than I remembered, but her words were clear. "Velda," she began, looking directly into the camera, "this isn't your house. And the money in those accounts, it's not yours. I've already told my attorney. Everything goes to Lorene. She was the one here. She was the one who stayed." Silence fell in the room, both in Jerome's office and on the video call. Velda's jaw tightened. She looked down, then back up, lips pressed into a thin line. "I never saw that video," she said, voice clipped. Edwina leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "You did. I handed it to you myself. You said you'd give it to the lawyer." Velda's face went pale. Jerome didn't let the silence stretch too long. He opened the folder in front of him and began laying out documents one by one. "Forged POA." He slid it forward. "Falsified DNR request." "Unauthorized property transfer." "GoFundMe proceeds pocketed directly." "Life insurance beneficiary changes using falsified documents." Each sheet of paper fell like a stone between them. Velda looked like she wanted to scream, but she didn't. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to keep her composure from shattering on camera. "I want this stopped," she hissed. "This is a setup." Jerome didn't flinch. "This is evidence." She stood suddenly, knocking her chair back. "You're all turning against me," she spat. "You have no idea what I've been through. You think I wanted this? I did what had to be done. Someone had to handle it all while she gestured toward the screen, toward me. While she couldn't. Tallis muttered, "That's not handling. That's stealing." Velda turned sharply to the screen. "You're nobody in this." "And yet," Jerome cut in, "she's here. And she has the screenshots, and the texts, and the testimony." Velda stood there, breathing hard. Then, She sat, slowly, quietly, like the air had finally left the room. Jerome didn't gloat. He simply slid one last folder across the table. "This is our civil case file. You may respond through your counsel." I didn't say a word. As the call ended, I didn't look back. I touched the edge of the tablet, once, and turned it off. After the screen went black, I sat in silence, letting the stillness press around me like a weighted blanket. Not heavy, but grounding. The kind that holds you down just enough to remember you're not floating anymore. It was over, or at least the part where Velda got to speak without being challenged. She finally knew someone had been watching, listening, calculating. 2 days later, Jerome wheeled me into the arbitration center just outside downtown. It wasn't a courtroom, not exactly. No judge in robes, no jury box. Just a large, muted room with wood-paneled walls and the kind of stiff chairs that discourage anyone from staying long. I wore a charcoal sweater and slacks, not to impress, but to reclaim something. I didn't want to look like a patient. I wanted to look like a woman who'd stood up. Velda was already there, sitting beside her attorney. She didn't look at me. Her jaw clenched when I entered, but her eyes stayed locked on the table. Her lawyer adjusted his cuffs, gave me a perfunctory nod, then returned to whispering something in her ear. Jerome sat beside me, calm as ever. He opened his folder and slid a thick envelope across the polished surface toward the panel of mediators. "This is our formal claim for full asset recovery," he began, voice even. "It includes all supporting documents for restitution, plus punitive damages as outlined in Section 230 of Ohio Civil Code. No theatrics, just facts." Velda's lawyer didn't speak. He looked through the envelope with no argument, just resignation. Velda sat stone still, not confident, not defiant, just waiting. And then it was my turn. I didn't need Jerome to speak for me. I leaned forward, placed both hands on the table, and looked directly at the mediators. "I'm not here to ask for fairness," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "I'm here to take back what was already mine, my accounts, my name, my house, my voice. Hey." That room didn't echo, but it felt like it did. Later, after we wrapped, Jerome handed the panel a final document that hadn't been reviewed during probate. It was tucked deep inside a folder labeled Personal Notes, the kind of file most people skim or discard. It was a handwritten letter. My mother's handwriting, tilted, tight cursive I could spot from across the room. I didn't need to read it again. I knew every word by heart. But this time, it mattered more because others would hear it too. Jerome read it aloud. "This home is for Lorene. She is the only one who never asked for anything but gave everything. She stayed. She sacrificed. It's hers. No matter what Velda says." Velda flinched. I saw it. Her shoulders stiffened as if the words had hit her skin. But still, no apology. Just silence. We didn't linger. Jerome and I left quietly. Outside, a light breeze tugged at the hem of my coat as we crossed the parking lot. No reporters, no cameras, just sky, open and clear for the first time in a long time. That afternoon, Velda got a phone call she hadn't expected. The prosecutor's office. Apparently, when you use a forged medical directive to alter legal documents, when you reroute donated funds from a fake campaign, and when you file beneficiary changes under false pretenses, people pay attention. The civil case had triggered a criminal investigation. I didn't see her when it happened. I only heard about it later, how she collapsed in the courthouse hallway, knees buckling, mascara streaking. Not because she regretted it, but because, for the first time, she couldn't control what happened next. She called Jerome's office. He didn't answer. A month passed. The air cooled, and the leaves outside my new window shifted from golden to brittle brown. I was finally discharged, walking out of the hospital on my own legs, slower than I'd like, but steadier than anyone expected. I didn't go back to my old condo. I didn't want walls that had watched me be erased. I moved into my mother's house, legally mine, restored in title and deed. The kind of quiet that filled it wasn't empty. It was earned. There were no throw pillows arranged by Velda, no wine stains on the kitchen counter from her brief, dramatic visits. Just me. I unpacked slowly, room by room. I saved the photo for last. It was the only one Velda hadn't stolen in her sweep of personal things weeks ago. Just me and Mom on the back porch, laughing. No filter, no staging. I hung it in the hallway near the door. That evening, I opened the front window and watered the geraniums. The porch creaked under my step, something I'd been meaning to fix but hadn't. The neighborhood was quiet, just the soft sounds of leaves brushing against each other and the occasional car passing by. Then my phone buzzed. I didn't need to check the screen to know who it was. The area code gave her away. I let it ring. Then I turned the phone face down and sat on the porch, watching the last of the light settle behind the trees. The phone didn't ring again that night. The following morning, I fed my dog, Max, a beagle mix with too much bark for his size, then stepped out to grab the newspaper. The porch boards still creaked under my feet, but they sounded less like a burden now, and more like an old friend reminding me I was home. 3 years had passed since I walked out of that hospital on my own 2 feet. The scars had healed, most of them anyway. I taught watercolor twice a week from the sunroom Mom used to keep her quilting machine in. The smell of turpentine and paper filled that space now, not the hush of illness. Life had settled into a quieter rhythm. Not lonely, just quiet enough to hear myself think again. It was on a Thursday, somewhere between lesson prep and sweeping the porch, that the knock came. Soft, hesitant. 2 short taps, then a pause. I knew before I opened the door. She stood there in faded jeans and a weathered windbreaker, eyes sunken a bit deeper, shoulders slightly slouched. She looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in presence. Time hadn't been gentle to her, and I didn't mean the years. I meant the weight of living in a world where the lies eventually stopped working. I came to say, "I'm sorry," Velda said. No hello, no apology rehearsed. Just that. I didn't step aside. I didn't open the screen door. She didn't expect me to. "I thought you were gone," she said, brushing hair from her face like it would somehow help her words land better. "And I thought I deserved it, after everything I'd been through." Her voice cracked, not with emotion, but with strain, like she'd worn it too thin, trying to sound like someone she used to be. I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, "And I thought you were my sister." She flinched, just slightly, but it was there. She didn't ask to come in. She didn't cry. She stood still, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. A woman who had once steamrolled over every boundary I ever set, now struggling to figure out if she was allowed to stand on my porch. "Do you hate me?" she asked quietly. I took a breath, but I didn't rush my answer. "No," I said, "and that's the hardest part." We stood there in silence, the kind that stretched. Not awkward, just real. There was nothing left to explain, no speeches, no outbursts. Just 2 women standing on the ashes of something they both once believed in, unsure of how to rebuild it, or whether they should. After a moment, Velda nodded. "I just needed you to know," she said, then turned and walked down the steps, her shoes barely making a sound on the gravel path. She didn't look back, and I didn't invite her to. That evening, I finished a painting I'd been working on for weeks. A soft, moody landscape of a house at dusk. The windows glowed amber. The trees around it bowed slightly, like they were offering protection. It wasn't my house, not exactly, but it carried the soul of what I'd rebuilt here. Before I cleaned my brushes, I added one final detail: a single chair on the front porch. Empty, not because someone was missing, but because there was now space for stillness, for peace. I hung the canvas above the fireplace. Max barked at the sound of a squirrel scurrying outside, then curled at my feet as I made a cup of tea and sat down on the porch. The night air was soft, not cold. The kind of evening where the crickets sang, not screamed. No legal notices, no hospital forms, no emergency contacts. Just me. I'd lost a sister, but I'd found my voice. And it turned out, that was the only thing I ever really needed to keep. Before I go, if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it's where strength begins. I spent years believing that staying quiet meant keeping the peace, that if I just gave a little more, loved a little harder, or stayed a little longer, things would balance themselves out. They didn't. People will take as much as you let them. And the ones closest to you? Sometimes they're the first in line when you falter. But that doesn't make you naive. It makes you human. And what matters is not how much they took, but how you rebuild after they're gone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't burn bridges. I just chose me. So if you're watching this and you've ever felt invisible, dismissed, replaced, or betrayed by someone you trusted, know this. You can come back. Quietly. Powerfully. On your own terms. Now let me ask you, have you ever had someone in your life cross the line and act like you'd never come back? What did you do about it? Or are you still holding your truth inside, waiting for the right moment to speak? Drop a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from, or just type 1 if this story reached a part of you that still needed to be seen. And hey, if this story meant something to you, even just a little, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. We've got more stories coming, real ones, quiet ones, the kind that stay with you long after the video ends. Thanks for sitting with me through this one. I'll see you in the next chapter.